So we talked about mechanics that we want in Street Fighter 6. We talked about returning the guard crush meter, and Mir talked about whether we should have invincible DPs backs and stuff like that. But this one is one that I'm really afraid of coming to Street Fighter. I don't know if you guys feel the same about it. The question is, do we want a burst mechanic or a breakaway mechanic, combo breaker, whatever you call it, mechanic to come to Street Fighter 6? So we've had this mechanic slowly come to more and more fighting games. We've had it in like Mortal Kombat, for example, has the breakaway mechanic where people are, they flip out when they're being juggled, for example. It's more familiar in anime games, especially like Guilty Gear, because we have like burst. And even in Killer Instinct, we have a combo breaker, but Killer Instinct doesn't really count because combo breaker and Killer Instinct is like the core mechanic. You know, you can't really say, you know, don't want it in Killer Instinct, otherwise the game is in Killer Instinct, you know what I'm saying? But it's never been in Street Fighter before. And I know you guys are thinking combo breaker mechanics are more suited for games with, you know, very high damage, very long combos, unless you're playing Marvel. But usually they're in those kind of games where it's some kind of safety, some kind of defensive mechanic that you need. You guys think maybe it'll never come to Street Fighter, but we have to always assume that every single Street Fighter game is going to be vastly different than the other, right? Capcom always tries to change it up. They always try to bring some new mechanic to the table, you know? And the V-Trigger system was suspiciously close to the Instinct system in Killer Instinct, I would say. So I wouldn't be surprised if they made up a mechanic that's like, you know, like a burst and they call it something else, whatever they call it in Street Fighter. And another thing I should note as well is we don't know who the battle director is for Street Fighter 6, and if it's still Woshige, then it's scary, because Woshige likes to implement Guilty Gear things into Street Fighter in general. You know, he changed a really big thing with the no invincible DPs, and we have a lot of new characters that are based on kind of Guilty Gear style characters, just little hints of it. You know, like Falk, where she goes prone and she fires her gun. So I guess I should start this off by saying I hate this mechanic. I don't like it in any game. And yes, I understand that, you know, it's necessary for some games, but I just personally don't like it at all. I never liked it. So let's go over the pros and cons. I'll start with the pros, you know, to keep the video as positive as I can. So one pro of having a breakaway slash, you know, combo breaker burst is that it prevents infinites. So if there just happens to be an infinite, you know, that's very rare in a game like Street Fighter where you have like literally like juggle limit properties, but we had the Dan infinite. It was technically a semi-infinite, but you could do a true infinite if you were like, you know, TAS or whatever. If there happens to be a problem, there's some type of infinite in the game, then the burst can like save them for Capcom to patch up. But you know, we live in an age where Luke gets an emergency nerf, right? So I don't think we have to worry about infinites. Another thing too is that when I talk to a lot of anime players like Killy, for example, and I tell him about how much I hate burst, how dumb I think it is, he always says to me, well, you can bait the burst, right? You can play around it. It's kind of like its own meta. So there's that where you can add more kind of, I guess, interactive between both defensive and offensive players, right? It's more cerebral because now there's like this little meta of like, I'm doing a really huge combo, I know he's gonna burst, I can bait it, and then I can do an even bigger combo and end the round. Or you can be like, oh, I'm gonna burst as soon as possible on a smaller combo, just to, you know, make sure that I don't get put in the corner. And yeah, there's this own little thing, but you know, at the end of the day, I would argue that you can't burst bait everything, obviously. But there is some very obvious moments, of course, when like if the opponent's gonna die, for example. You know he's gonna die, you're gonna reach lethal, and then you can bait it and punish it, and it's hype to see, right? When you realize what's going on, you see the huge read, that's cool. I can get with that. Even in Mortal Kombat, you can bait the burst as well. In Mortal Kombat the breakaway, the way it works is in Mortal Kombat is when you're juggled up, you can basically, your character gains armor and they fall down. They like, your combo drops essentially. What you can do is when, now that the meta has evolved to the point where you know the opponent is gonna do it, and you literally just do a down two, like you do your uppercut to do the max amount of damage in one hit you can, because you're only gonna get one more hit, they're gonna armor it, and they're gonna fall to the ground. So there's kind of an optimization to that, because you have to guess, well, at least from what I understand, you have to guess for most characters. I don't know what the Mortal Kombat meta is now. Haven't played in a while, but you know, it could get to the point where you think that they're going to do the breakaway, and they know you're going to do a down two to optimize your damage, and then you don't do it, and then they end up getting less damage overall. You know, so there's a little meta to that. And like the third pro to it, I don't know if this is necessarily a pro, but some people would see it as a pro, so I listed it. And it gives the players another chance. It's kind of like a comeback. Do you guys consider burst a comeback mechanic? It's kind of like a comeback mechanic. It makes it so that you know, in games with high damage, or you get like a round stolen or from you, you get robbed or whatever, right? It gives you like one last chance that if your defense was really good and you screwed up just once, you get a get out of jail free card, right? Some people like the idea of that because some people, you know, there's some games where you can outplay your opponent like 90% of the round, and then you make one little mistake and you lose, right? You know, even in Street Fighter, even though the damage isn't as high as other games, it is pretty frustrating when you anti-air your opponent 5 times and then they finally get the jump in on the 6th, and it feels like, man, all that damage that I did to him didn't stop him, and it was worth it for them, you know? They have a bunch of super meter built up with their V trigger, they land a fat jump in, and they lost all my health because of one mistake, you know? So I can see it that way as well. You guys don't consider it a comeback? I don't want to be like disingenuous here. Is there any other more pros to breakaway and burst? I really thought about it, guys. I thought about it for like 15 minutes straight. No, round start gold burst is the big brain scrub play. Alright, let's talk about the cons now. The reason I don't like it so much, like my main beef with it, is that I just feel like it's a mechanic put in the game that's just not fun for anyone. I don't think it's fun for the players, and I don't think it's fun for the spectators either. It goes both ways. I think as a player, when you're playing someone, especially competitively, I think it's very frustrating to land a hit and not be rewarded for it. You know, it kind of goes against everything that we grew up in playing fighting games. I hate it. So for example, let's say someone whiffs a DP, right? You bait a DP, they do sure you can, and you're like, I'm gonna do a fat punish on this guy. I baited this, I earned this hit. You know, they land and then they burst. Ken just bursts out, and you're like, no, now I gotta bait it again. That could be really annoying, and it could also encourage really scrubby play, right? Because we had problems like this before, and even now, I would argue, in Street Fighter 4, we had the FADC system, where people were DPing like no tomorrow, making it safe. And even the V-trigger activation is something that's been plaguing the game now, where not only when you do a random move, and you block and you activate, you're plus. You know, it's good both ways, and if you hit, you get to continue your combo. I think we want to have less of that, you know? I don't want it so that they activate V-trigger and then they activate burst, you know? Both of those would be just too much. It'd be too wild. I think as a spectator as well, I think it'd be kind of lame to watch. There's nothing more annoying than seeing someone getting zoned out. I mean, like I said, I don't want to pick on Guilty Gear, but let's say there's a character that throws a million swords at you. Okay, let's just say. And then you're a character that's really big and strong, and you need to get close to do any damage, okay? And then you're stuck in block stun for 20 hours blocking swords, and then you finally get in. Some Christmas miracle comes in, the opponent had to scratch their nose, and they dropped their controller for whatever reason, and you had 1 second to get in. You finally get in, and then they burst. And then as a spectator, it's so frustrating to watch, because you're trying to cheer for the underdog, and it's just like there's so many things against them, including the game's own mechanics, right? You know, there's a lot of zoner characters in Street Fighter. It could be really frustrating to have a character like Guile or Poison, you know, gets their hands on a breakaway mechanic. It'd be hard to balance, I feel. I guess the bottom line is I don't feel like a burst mechanic needs to be in Street Fighter 6 or in Street Fighter in general, because unless the game is just wild, you know, they make it really crazy, more of that aggressive anime style or more kind of KOF style, I guess, you know, but it definitely wouldn't work in Street Fighter 5, especially with, you know, V-triggers. You know, that's your most powerful window. It's when when you have your biggest chance of coming back. You know, imagine Minot activating your V-trigger, and then the opponent just bursts out of it, right? And then that's it. That was your opportunity. You're donezo. You know what I'm saying? I think Street Fighter does a good enough job with, you know, combo scaling, meter management, and, you know, making many moves in this game punishable is good enough, and honestly easier to understand too, you know. This move has high risk, high reward. You know, that's pretty much the Street Fighter way that it's been going, the direction it's been going for a while. Well, for most characters, in a balanced point of view. Even though I don't like it in any fighting game, I feel like for anime fighters and games like Mortal Kombat, dude, there's like huge combos in that game, you know? 40%, 60% combos, maybe even more now. I haven't checked in a while. You know, those games I can understand you having it because you just do massive deeps. You can die in maybe 2 combos. A game like Guilty Gear, I don't know how many times you get touched. You die maybe twice, maybe 3 times. So I can understand it there, and it's kind of like, you know, a course mechanic that's been with the game through a long time. But I don't think if Capcom is sitting down thinking of all mechanics they can add to Street Fighter 6 and looking at other fighting games, I think looking at combo breakers or breakaways would be terrible. I don't think of a way they can add it to make it fun or cool. And I'm honestly really scared about it, guys. I'm scared because they've never added it, and I don't know. Capcom can do crazy things because every Street Fighter is so different. So I'm worried about it. That's one of my greatest fears, is them adding a breakaway mechanic. As silly as that sounds, right? That's another good point too, Flashy, is that there are rumors that Street Fighter 6 at least at one point has some kind of team mechanic. So if there's high damage and tag combos or whatever, a burst mechanic could be likely, and I'm afraid of that. So there's always a chance. YouTube, let me know in the comments below what you guys think about a breakaway mechanic in Street Fighter. Does it belong in the game? Would you guys like to see it, or would it be the worst thing ever like I think it is? And also give me more ideas for mechanics to come to Street Fighter 6, and we could do videos on those too, because you got nothing better to do until we have news anyways, right?